Hey everybody, I'm Charlie Craven with Charlie's Fly Box, and today I'm going to tie for you my one of my very first Umpqua flies. This fly is called a Ragin Craven, and this fly I developed, initially as a permit fly that I could fish um, as a crab to throw out the fish and let it sink like a crab, but then have it look enough like a shrimp that I could retrieve the fly also and impart some action. And the idea was to kind of split the difference between the two. And since this fly came out 25 years ago or so, there's been lots of other iterations of patterns along this line. But I'm going to show you my version and see what you think. So this is on a size 4. I'm going to tie kind of a small one here so he fits on the screen a little bit better. And I'm going to take some 8/0 fluorescent green Veevus thread. I'm going to start this just up here behind the eye. And I just want to dress it maybe about the front third of the shank for right now. And the first thing I'm going to do is tie in my lead eyes. And these are plated lead eyes, and for a size 4, small or medium, depending on the depth of the water. But I'm going to use, these are mediums here. I'm going to use some mediums, and I'm going to tie them in with 10 or 12 turns one way, and then I'll take a rapid thread around the hook, and then I'll pull the eye in place and go 10 or 12 turns the other direction, meaning front to back, and back to front, and then I'll work back and forth the other way, and I want to build that up a bit to anchor those eyes down. And then I'll take a few parachute wraps in between the eyes and the hook just to lock everything down and make sure everything's squared up. And you can see those are right up to the hook eye. I have just enough room to tie the thread off up there. I don't need much room. And then I'll bring my thread all the way back to the bend. And once I get back there, I'm going to come even a little bit beyond the bend so that I'm coming up that curve, or in the case of the way the hook is sitting right now, down that curve. The finished fly, obviously, with those lead eyes is going to ride hook point up, so we're going to tie these antennae in here around that bend so that they face up when the fly sits. So I'm going to take one strand of Rootbeer Crystal Flash and one strand of black. Like so, and I'll tie them in at the center of their length and fold them over. I'll wrap back over those down to the bend there. And I'll just let those hang out at the back for the moment. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to build a little spreader. And what I do with that is I take some tan craft fur. And this is not extra select craft fur or polar fiber. This is just regular old-fashioned craft fur. And I'm going to run a dubbing brush through it until I pick up some of this under fur. And I'm going to use this under fur as dubbing to build this ball. So I'll take a little pinch of this under fur, and I'm just going to twist it onto my thread. And it's fairly shaggy. It doesn't dub down super tight, but that's sort of the idea. I'm going to build a ball here right at the bend of the hook. And I want a fairly pronounced ball. You can see you can kind of tighten this up as you go. Give it an extra little twist. This is going to be a spreader ball to help spread the mouth parts and the claws that we're about to put on. So just a little ball there at the bend. And then for the mouth parts, what we're going to do is we're going to take a clump of that craft fur and cut it down as close to the hide as you can, so that when you get it, you've got that under fur that's down there in the bottom. And what I'll do is I want to pull that out. All that under fur I just pulled out, and I'll set that aside. I'm still going to use that. I'll just use it later. But what I'm left with are those longer sort of guard hair, longer pieces. And I'll just sort of hand stack this to get this evened up a little bit into a nice neat little clump. I can cut some of that extra length off, like so. So now I'm going to take this clump of craft fur, and I'm going to push it down here around the bend. It's about a shank length long, maybe just a little touch longer. Set it here at the bend, and I'm going to take a loose wrap around it with my thread and let that sort of fan around the hook. You can see I can sort of manually distribute that. And I'm going to wrap over it right up to the base of that ball to let that spread that out, like so. Now these butt ends, I'll trim just short of the eyes. And then I can wrap forward over those just to anchor those down. That'll help build a little bulk on the body. Now we'll put the claws in. And the claws on the Ragin are just a furnace streamer cape. This is a Chinese streamer cape that I'm using here, which are getting a little hard to find these days, and my recommendation would be to look at some of the Whiting American streamer capes, and they've got just a beautiful badger dyed brown that is, gosh, in most cases better than what you could get for furnace. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take two, in this case of this size 4, two small, down toward the tip of the neck, two small hackle feathers, and I'm going to oppose them, so put them back to back so they curve away from each other, and get their tips even. And then I'll take that measurement, again, just slightly longer than the hook shank. I'll get that measurement, and I always like to trim them maybe just a little long. And then I'll trim the base so that there's some bare stem there. Make sure those stayed even. They did. And I'm going to tie these in back here by the eyes. And I want to see those tips a little far back. I want those tips to extend just past that craft fur, like so. And what I'll do at this point is I'm going to spread one to my near side and one to the far side. And just sort of hold them in place. And I even kind of sweep them down slightly as I wrap back over them. Again, right up to the base of that ball so that they're spread out. Get a couple turns on there and give you an idea of what we've got. We'll back you up just a little bit here. And right back into focus. There we go. So we've got those two claws hanging out the back. And now what I'll do is I'm going to form a long dubbing loop, so maybe 6 or 8 inches. On a size 4, 6 inches is probably just about right. And I'll tie that loop off right up to the base of the tail. I'll take my dubbing whirl and catch my thread, and then I'll take one leg of that loop and put it in my material spring, and that'll hold that back out of the way in the meantime. So I just got my thread to contend with. Now for the legs, I've always used natural latex colored rubber legs, which again is something that's really hard to find these days. Plain white works just fine. These are just medium round rubber legs. You can use silly legs or sexy legs, but staying true to the original pattern from a long time ago, it was this natural colored latex. And what I'll do here is kind of divide this section of the hook here, where we're going to build the body, into thirds. So I'm going to put one leg in about 1/3 of the way back. It's really about 1/4 of the way back, just with a couple of X-wraps. Then I'll put the next leg in. And you can see how that might sit oddly on the hook. You can always turn it, and then put your other 2 wraps the other way. And then if you pull up, you can kind of center those on top. And I don't sweat the exact placement of these legs or if they're exactly straight. You'll see here in a minute, we're going to use the dubbing loop that we built to help separate these legs. But we want them evenly spaced, like so. So now I'm going to take one more clump of that craft fur and cut it from the hide, just like we did for the first one. And this might give us a little better view here. There you go. And I'm going to pinch that under fur, and I'll pull out all that long stuff, like so. Now I'll reserve this long stuff because I can use that for the mouth parts on the next fly. So what I've got is just this under fur here in my hand. And what I'll do is I'll couple that with the first clump that I had. And you can see how I'm just scissoring that between my fingers. I've got a few extra long ones in there. I'll take those out. And I'll set these 2 clumps one on top of each other. One of the nice things about this craft fur is it stays together pretty well. And I'll take my first clump, get my dubbing loop out of here. There we go. Take my first clump and put it between the 2 strands of thread. Then I'll pick up my second clump and put it right below it. And I don't worry too much about it being perfectly square. Get your focus back here and see what I've done there. And we'll get back focused on the fly here. So now I'm going to pinch the dubbing loop just under, I've got a couple crazy ones here I'm going to trim out. I'm going to pinch it just under the fur and spin the whirl. And just let that twist start to work up the thread. And as it does so, it usually wants to catch those legs like that. So I'll just come in with my scissor tips and unwind them. If you hold the legs up at the same time and give it a spin, what you end up with is this nice shaggy chenille strand. So I'm going to take my dubbing brush and I'm going to use it to brush out my dubbing brush. So just pick out anything that's been bound down there. And now I'm going to start to wrap this dubbing loop. So I'm going to hold those legs out of the way, and I'm going to get the first turn right at the base of the tail, and put the next turn in behind the legs. Then I'll grab my leg and hold it out of the way, get the next turn jammed right up against the back edge. Sneak another turn in there, and you can see how you can use your scissor tips to sort of maneuver those legs out of the way. And I try to get 3 turns in between that set of legs. And I'm just going to continue wrapping this dubbing loop right up to the next set of legs, sweep those back. And then I'll just kind of comb everything back until I wrap right up to the eyes. And I want to jam right up to the eyes. I've got just about enough to do it exactly right. And I'll tie off that loop just behind the eyes with a few tight turns of thread. And I can trim that thread out. Hold that back out of the way, jump my thread up here to the hook eye, and at this point I'll whip finish. If I want to put a weed guard in, and I probably will show you how to do that here next, I can come back in and start the thread. So the tying process is done. So pretty plain tan bug. We're going to dress them up a little bit, but first we want to brush them out. Really go at them with the dubbing brush and kind of sweep everything back toward the bend. About like so. Now the easiest way to show this is I'm going to try to hold this up next to the vise while I do it. I'm going to come in with my scissors and I'm going to trim the top side of the body into a bit of an arc. You don't want to get too carried away with the trimming here. About like so. So I've just rounded that top half off a bit. And then I could put him back in my vise. And I'm going to lift up all this fur between the legs on the bottom, and I'm going to trim that off flush. You want to be careful not to trim a leg off when you do that. So nice and flat there. One thing I do like to do on this fly is I'll pull those legs down. Once I've trimmed that, I can take a cigarette lighter and just singe that a little flatter down on the bottom. That assures the fly's got a flat bottom. Now to make this show a little easier for you, I'm going to open up the jaws on my vise and just pinch the hook eye here. Let's get you repositioned. Multi-angle camera work here. I'll sweep these legs down again, kind of come in for my final trim, clean up the top of that body. And I want some width to the body from side to side, but you can see the shrimpy shape of them here from this side. So I'll separate out. I've got my Krystal flash twisted up a bit. And I'll trim those to various lengths. I don't want them all the same length. And I'll come in and start the coloring process. So the first thing I'm going to do is come in with the black Sharpie marker right at the bend, right above that ball of dubbing you put on. I'm going to put a little black eye on each side. It's just a black spot, like so. And then I'll come in with a sepia colored marker, and I'm going to create some bands. We're just going to do some barring here. You can see how I can work this marker into the fur to create these bars. All the way across. Like so. And once we've got that color on there, we can do the same thing to the top. I kind of sweep everything down. We can give them a little singe. And that'll kind of clean up that top edge. Now we're starting to look a lot more shrimpy. Alright, so the final step here for coloring the legs is I'm going to take that same sepia marker, and what I'll do is I'm going to stretch out a leg, and I just run it across the tip of the marker to create these bands. And I'm going to do that on each leg to variegate this up a bit. And you can do two at once if you're crafty and haven't had too much coffee. See where a rotary vise comes in handy, just flipping things back and forth to be able to see both sides. I'm going to use the fine tip on this marker to bar the mouth parts a bit. We could add a little black in there as well to bar that up. And then finally I'll come in with a red marker, and just at the tip of the legs, which is going to be just outside the craft fur, we're going to build a longer red band there on each side. So now I'll sweep everything down, and I'm going to come in and trim these legs just so that they end in red on both sides. I get one more little singe in there. I can clean them up a little closer to the head here. There we go. We're going to zoom you back even more. This fly, I'm glad I did a size 4. A size 2 or size 1 that I had intended would have never fit on the screen. I had to put the camera in the other room. But there he is. That's a little better view. And that's the Ragin Craven. And like I say, this is one of my first Umpqua flies, and they still sell it really well. 25 years later, it actually sort of surprises me. But this fly has become sort of a go-to throughout the Bahamas and Florida and Belize originally. And since I've got about 1 minute left, I'm gonna start again, and I'll show you how to put the weed guard in, just since we've got you here. So bear with me, I'll be right back. Alright, so to install the weed guard on one of these, what I'll do is I'll put the fly back in the vise, and I'll start my thread in back behind the hook eye. And you can see why I didn't do this as I was tying the fly, because it'll end up sort of in our way. But I'm going to start my thread in there just behind the hook eye, and I've got 2 strands of 12-pound Mason hard mono. And what I'll do here is I'm going to even the ends up, and I'm going to pinch the ends with a pair of D-bar pliers to flatten them a bit, like so. I'm going to push both ends up through the hook eye and just short of the lead eyes. They can even overlap just slightly. And I'll tie it down there, and I want to anchor that down good and tight in place. Then I can take my hook and turn it over, and I'm going to fold this mono back so that I've got a strand on either side of the hook point. And I'll just start wrapping. Get my vise readjusted here for you. I'm just going to start wrapping until that mono gets folded back over. And you can see it doesn't take much room as far as a head area to get that stood up just right. You can Even take a couple of X wraps in between if you need. Those are pretty good. I'm not worried about the curve here on this far piece because it's going to end up far shorter anyway. So I'm going to anchor those in place, and then I'll whip finish that thread and trim that out. Now what I'll do is I'll kind of prop this mono up a bit, and I'm going to go just beyond the hook point for my cutoff point. And I'll come back in with those D-bar pliers. I'm going to pinch the end just beyond the hook point and flatten that mono and then sort of kink it back like so. We'll do that on both sides. So I'm squeezing it and pushing it back. So we've got a bit of a weed guard, and that's handy for fishing this fly in spots that have got some grass or to some degree even coral. Coral seems to want to stick to everything. We'll put some head cement on there. Let that soak in. I think I got, nope, I thought I got it in the hook eye, but I don't think I did. But if I had, here's a cool little trick I want to show you. If you get head cement or epoxy in the eye of a hook, if you take a feather, and really just any feather that you have handy, let me turn that a bit, and just run it through the hook eye and pull it through, it'll sweep out any head cement that you may have got in there inadvertently. That doesn't hardly ever happen to me anymore because I'm an expert, but I'm glad it happened today so that I could pass that along. That was like my little goodwill tip for the day. And then I'll open the jaws up again and give you the full view. There we go. So there is our Ragin Craven with the weed guard and the whole shebang. Really cool, fun little fly to fish. Like I say, you can throw it at a permit and kind of fish it on the way down as a crab. Permit very often eat the fly on the drop, and then very often once the fly hits the bottom, they have no interest in it anymore. So the idea behind this was a fly that I could sort of turn into something else once it got there and give me a second chance. And since then, it's turned into a very popular redfish fly. All sorts of beach critters. It's just a shrimpy, crabby little critter. And this fly, just as a historical trivia, this fly was named by John Barr. This was one of the first flies I had in Umpqua, and I couldn't come up with a name for it, and he said, "You're going to call that the Ragin Craven." So I figured he was pretty good at it at the time. Still is pretty darn good at it. So I let him name this one. But that's where the name for the Ragin Craven came from, and that's how you tie that sucker. I hope you enjoyed watching. It's always fun to do. I'll be tying more and shooting more videos, so stay tuned. And if you have requests, send them in. I'm supposed to say hit like and follow and all that. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's more and more stuff coming for Charlie Slybox. So we appreciate all the support. Thanks for watching. We'll be back soon. Take care.